The moment Michael Jackson walked through the doors of the Motown studio, I knew I had witnessed something irreversible, a moment that would rewrite American music. August 3rd, 1970, Motown West, Los Angeles. I remember that afternoon as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. The atmosphere in the Motown studio in Los Angeles was not one of busy bustle, but of a strange kind of stillness. The kind of stillness that foretells something that will change everything. I was standing at the console, twirling the old pencil that had accompanied me through hundreds of previous recording sessions. But today, it wasn't the hum of the machines or the flashing lights that caught my attention. It was the feeling of someone touching my back, a premonition. When the door opened, I unconsciously stopped all thinking. A group of families entered first, and among them, I saw a little boy. No introduction needed. I knew it was Michael Jackson, the kid people had been whispering about all week. Some called him Gary's little gem. Others half-believingly said he had a voice beyond his years. It was all word of mouth, and I'd heard enough word of mouth in this business to know that it wasn't always reliable. But when Michael walked through the door, my doubts were pulled taut like a string. He was smaller than I'd expected. Skinny, shy, his shoes a little worn. But his eyes, those eyes were the complete opposite. They were bright, like the glow of a spotlight, but not the kind of bright that was meant to be flashy. It was the glow of quiet concentration, as if he were listening to the room even before it made a sound. I'd seen many singers, many young talents, but this felt different. There was something about Michael, an energy that was hard to put into words. Behind me, a few technicians began to whisper. Is that the 8-year-old kid everyone was talking about? I wonder if his voice is as good as they say. Or maybe people are just exaggerating. I heard it all without turning around. Not because they were disrespectful, but because I understood that it was the normal reaction of someone used to looking at life by evidence, not by hearsay. But I sensed something else. A strange energy, subtle but powerful. Like a background music so low that only those who were really paying attention could hear it. When Joseph Jackson, the children's father, stepped forward to introduce them, I could barely hear what he said. My eyes followed Michael. He stood in front of his brothers, his hands clasped together, his eyes darting around but unfazed. I'd seen older people walk into Motown with false confidence, but not Michael. He didn't act like he was special. That made him even more special. I remember bending down to Michael's level, just to say hello and ask a question familiar to anyone who came into my studio. Are you ready to make some music? Michael looked at me for a few seconds, a surprisingly long few seconds, and then nodded, very slightly, very firmly. That nod said more to me than any introduction could. As we led the group into the main studio, I could feel the division in the room. Half the engineering team was eager to see if the kid was really talented. The other half was cautious, as if they were preparing to prove the rumors were just rumors. And me? I was caught between those expectations, but my heart leaned heavily toward intuition. I'm not a gullible person. This profession has taught me that everything has to be tested against real sound. But what surprised me was this. I hadn't even heard him sing, but I was already mentally prepared for something extraordinary to happen. I looked to the corner of the room. A little dust was flying in the beam of sunlight from the high window, and that light happened to fall on Michael. The boy stood still, not naughty, not swaying, not showing any signs of tension. He just stood there, waiting for my signal. In that moment, I suddenly understood that there are talents that need no introduction, no need to show off, no need to prove with words. There are people, no matter how small, no matter how silent, who still draw all eyes to them in the most natural way. And Michael was one of them. I pointed to the microphone and said, "Let's try a few notes." No one in the room knew that the next moment would become one of the memories that would haunt me for the rest of my life, in the best sense. But I knew. I felt it very clearly. It was as if I was standing before a light that was just emerging, about to burst forth in an unstoppable way. I watched Michael walk toward the microphone as if he had walked that path 1,000 times before. No confusion, no hesitation, just the calm quiet of a boy who knew exactly what he was doing and did it well. It gave me a little shiver. An 8-year-old with the eyes of an artist stepping onto a big stage? That was rare, so rare that I knew I had to watch him more closely. The microphone was lowered accordingly. Michael stood on his tiptoes, testing the distance by inhaling slightly, then exhaling evenly. The movements were small but subtle. Many adult singers couldn't do that. He knew how to stand so his breath wouldn't hit the microphone, how to turn his body just enough so his voice wouldn't be muffled. Where did that come from? Practice, inborn, or some strange combination? Behind the glass, the technicians began to quiet down. Chairs shifted slightly, pens stopped tapping on the table. They were paying attention, not out of politeness, but out of a general sense that what was about to happen was worth waiting for. I pressed the play button. The sound came softly, the first few beats like an invisible carpet under the boy's feet. Michael closed his eyes and sang. The first line came, and it felt like someone had slammed a door behind me. All other sounds disappeared. No car horns outside, no air conditioners, no fans in the studio. Just the boy's voice, so clear, so pure it almost cut through the air. I'd heard a lot of young voices. Most of them either lacked control or tried too hard to sound mature. But Michael did the exact opposite. He didn't try at all. The voice came from the most primal place, a naturalness that made all the technique redundant. His breathing even. The final note was held so precisely that I knew it was instinct, not luck. Each word was sung as if the boy understood exactly what was going on. How could an 8-year-old understand the feelings in that song? I don't know. But Michael didn't need to understand rationally. He understood emotionally. The kind of feeling that musicians sometimes yearn for all their lives. After the first verse, I glanced into the control room glass. Everything, I emphasize, everything was still. No one was writing, no one was adjusting equipment, no one was moving. A technician was holding a cup of coffee, but it stopped in midair, tilted so far that it almost spilled, but he didn't notice. The silence was strange, as if the entire Motown building had stopped breathing to hear a child sing. Michael continued singing, and I began to feel time move differently, slower, longer. Each line seemed to pull the room into its own orbit. A note he executed so perfectly that a chill ran down my spine. Not from fear, but from the realization that such a moment was so rare that I doubted I would ever see it again. At Motown, we had worked with great artists, but Michael, he was unlike anyone I had ever known. Not a starlet, not a genius, but something deeper. A raw, unpolished light so bright it silenced everyone. In the middle of the song, Michael opened his eyes. He wasn't looking at me, not at his brothers, not at any of the technicians. He was staring into space in front of him as if there was an invisible path, and he was following it. I saw his tiny fingers flex slightly with the beat. His shoulders relaxed, but his voice grew stronger. The way he transitioned from low notes to high notes made me tilt my head to make sure I heard him right. This wasn't lucky coincidence. This was real ability. I heard a technician's soft intake of breath, the kind you only get when you've just witnessed something far beyond your expectations. Michael reached the song's climax, a point that many adult singers would be wary of, and I froze. He wasn't pushing too hard, he wasn't showing off, he was just singing, but it was that simplicity that felt so incredibly powerful. As soon as he hit the last note, I felt the space expand, as if we'd just come back to reality. But no one said anything. No one moved, not a single sharp breath. There was absolute silence, but not awkward silence. It was stunned silence. I knew it in seconds. This moment, this very moment, would stay with me for the rest of my professional life. And that was just the audition. As soon as the boy finished the last note, a soft note I thought I would never forget, something strange happened. The room became too quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't focused anymore, but the quiet of shock. I stood a few feet away from Michael, but it felt like there was a vast space between us. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the faint background noise from the Los Angeles streets seemed to have disappeared. I'd seen many wow moments in my career, but never had the entire room been locked down like this. One technician, Ken, was holding a pencil, but it fell to the table without him noticing. Another, Eddie, kept his coffee cup to his lips, his eyes wide as if the boy in front of him had just performed magic. I took a deep breath, trying to pull myself back to reality. Michael. My voice was so soft I wasn't sure if the boy had heard it. But Michael turned back to me, his eyes wide and innocent, as if he didn't understand what had just happened. And that was the second thing that made me shiver. The boy had no idea he had just done something extraordinary. No. The silence stretched for a few more seconds, which to me felt like a minute. Then suddenly, a chair scraped. Eddie put his coffee cup down on the table, let out a long breath. "Hal, did you hear what I heard?" Another sound came from the corner of the room. "No way, that can't be live." And boom, the whole room seemed to wake up from its frozen state at once. Discussions, questions, and exclamations flooded out at the same time. Someone jumped up and asked me, "Did you edit anything on the recording, or did you have any effects on the microphone?" I shook my head. No, everything was on the basic setting. Then came the question I knew would be asked. "Mr. Hal, are you sure we're listening live?" Some even turned to doubt that the recording was assisted, a ridiculous assumption, but I didn't blame them. Many adult singers couldn't sing a version as seamless, steady, and refined. I didn't say anything more. I just raised my hand for silence, then walked to the console. The room immediately fell into another tense silence, this time a silence of anticipation. I reached for the play button. A small click sounded, and the tape rolled. The sound from the wall speakers made the room hold its breath. The vocals, every word, every beat, every breath, were exactly the same as what we'd just heard live. No difference at all, no distortion, no effects, just the real voice of an 8-year-old boy. I looked around the room through the glass. A few people put their hands to their foreheads, as if realizing that the standards they had always used to judge talent no longer applied. Ken, the most stern technician, said into the microphone, "I can't believe it. I've been at Motown for years. I've never heard a kid sing like that." Another person chimed in, "Can you check the background vocals? Is someone else singing in the background?" I replied immediately, "No one else? Just Michael." The boy stood in the studio, his hand lightly holding the microphone, looking at me through the glass with a bewildered expression. He had no idea that he had just made all the veteran Motown technicians question their craft. I turned off the tape. The final sound echoed softly through the speakers like an imaginary punctuation mark. For a moment, the room fell silent again. But this time, it was different. It was a silence of recognition, of us all understanding that what had just happened was no accident. A voice from behind broke the silence. "Hal, if this boy continues to pursue music, we are on the brink of something big." I turned around, looking at everyone. They looked at me, not to ask what was going on. They looked with the eyes of people who knew that I, as the producer, was the one who had to make the next decision. I looked back at Michael. The boy let go of the microphone, straightened his back, but kept his innocent eyes, completely unaware that he had just created a small historical moment. A sentence appeared in my heart that I could not say at that moment. We have just witnessed the beginning of a legend. But the most important thing, this is just the first note. The recording ended, but no one left the studio immediately. People stood around talking, asking questions, going over and over the story as if they had just witnessed something far beyond the scope of a normal audition. But amidst all the chatter, I was drawn to something entirely different. Michael's eyes, not the eyes of pride, not the eyes of excitement, the eyes of a boy who didn't understand why everyone was looking at him like that. He was still standing behind the microphone, a little hesitant, his hands clasped together. When I walked into the studio, he looked up and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" The question cut me a little. A kid who had just silenced the entire Motown studio was asking if he did something wrong. I crouched down to his level and said, "Michael, you didn't do anything wrong. You did better than most adults." The boy pursed his lips and nodded slightly, but his eyes were still troubled. I realized Michael was not used to adult surprise, especially this kind of surprise mixed with expectation. As I led Michael out into the hallway to give him a breather, his brothers came running in from outside. Tito, Jermaine, and Jackie looked at their younger brother with a strange mixture of pride and concern. They clearly sensed what was happening too, something beyond the scope of their family. Joseph Jackson, my stern father, stepped closer. He didn't say much, just asked, "Can we do it?" I knew he was asking more. He was asking if his son had a chance, if years of practice on the small concrete floor in Gary could open the door to Motown. I replied with all the honesty I could muster, "Not only that, your son just stunned my engineering team." It was the first time that afternoon I saw Joseph smile, a rare smile, but one that held a hope bigger than the small studio. But Motown was not a quiet place. Rumors spread faster than music. Less than an hour later, I heard responses from other studios. I heard Hal found a new special voice. Really? An 8-year-old? Some say he sings like an adult. That's a rumor. Is this the next big thing the label has been waiting for? Rumors in the music industry have always existed, but this time it wasn't just a rumor. It was the aftershock of a reality. That little Jackson really did it. I stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, listening to the conversation of the Motown staff at the end of the hall. They spoke quietly, but enough for me to understand. Michael's presence had caused an internal stir. Some were excited, some were skeptical. Some took it as a sign that I had touched something big. But what bothered me most were not them. It was the 8-year-old boy standing next to his brother, clasping hands, trying to appear normal in the stressful adult world. That evening, I sat alone in the empty studio. There was no one else, just the dim lights and the low microphone Michael had used. The air still vibrated with the vibrations of his voice. I put my hands on the console, feeling like I was standing between two paths. One path led to bringing the boy and his family into the world of professional music, a place full of opportunity, but also full of pressure. The other way is to let things happen naturally, not to push too fast, not to push a child into a big cycle. But I know one thing clearly. Such talent, if not nurtured, will be a waste of heaven and earth. And I also know one more thing. If you continue, there is no way back. I closed my eyes, listening in my head to the echo of the last note Michael sang. I understood that that voice was not something that could be hidden in the dark. It was born to step into the light, to stand before thousands of people, to tell its own story. But that was the distant future. For now, I faced a single question. Do I have the strength to lead an 8-year-old child down such a big road? The answer came to me not in words, but in a very clear feeling, the way I felt the first time I saw the boy walk in. I knew what I had to do. I had to protect him. I had to guide him in the right direction. I had to do everything I could to keep that voice supported, not crushed by adult pressure. Michael didn't know and didn't need to know. But from that moment on, I, Hal Davis, had taken on a responsibility greater than I could ever imagine. And I knew that the next chapter would be much more complicated. The studio after dark always has a different sound, the sound of silence. No more laughter, the running of groups of artists, the sound of monitoring strings, just me and the desk lamp emitting a dim yellow light, enough to clearly see the old console but always the heart of every decision. I leaned lightly on the chair, my hands clasped together. On the table, the tape was still there. like a silent witness to the moment that had made the whole room freeze. I didn't want to play it again, not because I hesitated, but because I was trying to preserve the first feeling, the rare feeling in a career that makes people stop and think for a lifetime. Michael Jackson. That boy had just entered the studio like a gentle breeze, but left like a strong undercurrent, leaving an echo that I couldn't ignore. I leaned forward, put my hand on the tape, but still didn't play it. I whispered to myself, "This will change everything, right?" No one answered, but I felt the answer, like a deep drumbeat in my chest. A light knock on the door startled me. It was none other than the youngest technician, Tommy. He entered with a strange hesitation. "Mr. Hal, are you still here?" I nodded, looking at him. "Yes. Is there anything?" Tommy rubbed his hands together, looked at the door, then back at me. "I just wanted to say, what happened today? It wasn't like a normal recording session." "Michael?" It was like he wasn't a boy. I was surprised by such a direct statement, but it was also what I had been thinking for the past few hours. I replied, "No one in the room today thinks that boy is normal." Tommy laughed shakily, not happily, but the kind of laugh that comes when someone realizes the world is bigger than they thought. I remember Michael's voice. It's still ringing in my head. I looked at the tape and turned back toward the door. "Remember that. It's not every day we stand at the beginning of something big." Tommy nodded slowly and walked away. As the door closed, I had to face the fact that that decision, the one everyone was waiting for me to make, could no longer be avoided. The next morning, I called the Jacksons to the Motown office. The room was small, the light was white, everything looked normal, but it felt different. On the desk, I laid the tape down in front of me like a card of decision. Michael sat close to Tito and Jermaine, his feet dangling from the ground. He looked around, not nervous, but very focused. He was different. Joseph Jackson sat up straight, his eyes sharp as if trying to guess the outcome. Catherine put her hands on her children's shoulders, anxious but hopeful. I took a deep breath and played the tape. Everyone listened. No one spoke as Michael's voice rang out. Catherine put her hand on her chest as if her heart had skipped a beat. Joseph closed his eyes and tilted his head as if calculating. Michael's brothers looked at him with a mixture of pride and surprise. When the tape stopped, I knew there was no turning back. I stood up. "I want to put the Jackson 5 on the new Motown project." The room held its breath. "Michael." I looked straight at the boy. "You're going to be the lead vocal." I had never seen Joseph jump up so quickly. His face was filled with the shock and triumph of a father who had dreamed this dream for so long. Catherine covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes shining with emotion. Michael just sat still, very still. It took him a few seconds to understand that life had changed. I'll sing?" Michael asked softly. I laughed, crouching down to his level. "Not just sing, I'll shake the world." He smiled, a small smile, but I could tell something was awakening inside him. When the family left, the office fell silent again. I looked through the glass door and saw Michael walking beside his brothers, holding his mother's hand, still swinging his little legs but walking a little faster, as if there was a rhythm only he could hear. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling deeply. The decision I had just made was unlike any other in my career. Not because of risk, not because of responsibility, but because I knew. The moment an 8-year-old sings so loud that the whole room falls silent, that is not a moment to be missed. It is the beginning of something that will go far beyond all of us. And I, Hal Davis, will be the one to open that door for him. But deep down, I also knew, when the door opens, the light is bright, and I must be ready to keep him from getting lost in it. I turned off the office light, step into the hallway, and know that a new chapter has just begun, one that none of us are truly prepared for. But the wheel of fate has turned, and from here on, nothing will ever be the same again.